When it comes to adoption, there is a lot of sugarcoating, and we have to call it out for what it is: the commodification of poor children. There is a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding about the world of Hollywood and celebrity. It's understandable because you know it's a world full of lies, manipulation, and deception. But the problem is, there's not a lot of accurate information about how they are lying, manipulating, and deceiving you. There's a lot of conjecture and conspiracy theories, but I get it. It's hard to follow and keep track of all the lies, manipulation, and deception while trying to connect the thread, especially if you haven't studied or worked in the entertainment industry. Because I have, let me burst Hollywood's bubble for you. Elitism, colonization, imperialism, exploitation, war, and religion have created a very sinister and detestable market that grew into the legitimate industry known as adoption. What initially started off as a market strictly for orphans and illegitimate children grew into an industry that relied on manipulation, coercion, and kidnapping to feed the demand in the West. I wish I could tell you that most of the children getting adopted were orphans, but no. Most parents living in poverty do not have the means to take care of their child, so they are manipulated into giving up their child for adoption or place them in orphanages. In their minds, temporarily, with the hopes of providing better care for them, not knowing it could become a permanent separation. Most of the children who went through or are in the adoption system have parents who love them and were deceived by adoption agencies, NGOs, charities, and missionaries, exploiting their conditions only to sell their children to people in Western countries. Because when you're poor, they think you're too stupid to stop them and lack the resources to fight back. In the worst cases, like South Korea, Ethiopia, Cambodia, and even the United States, they kidnapped and trafficked children, erasing any information that would allow them to reconnect with and find their families. I know it might sound hurtful to people, but in the West, particularly in the United States, people have an entitlement to have children. But the truth is, nobody is entitled to have a child, especially a child that does not belong to them. No religion or moral superiority entitles anybody to look down on the poor and allows you to take their children from them. No amount of money and resources entitle you to take someone else's child because you have the money and resources and they don't. But these are the sentiments that have created a supply and demand for poor children. So much so that it has made people steal babies from hospitals without their parents' knowledge and consent to later be trafficked through adoption agencies. Without them, the adoption industry wouldn't be the multi-billion-dollar industry it is, because they were and are the face of it all. Abortions made it difficult for unlucky stars to bear children, so adoption was an alternative way to have and raise children. What started off as a pathway to motherhood quickly turned into a method of stars boosting their own vanity to display to the world, which allowed the adoption industry to swoop in and capitalize on their adoption stories, making them their brand ambassadors. For their sinister plot to traffic poor children to entitled, morally superior, wealthy, and connected Western families. There is no celebrity more culpable than Jane Russell. After becoming a born-again evangelical Christian, Jane struggled to have children and opted to adopt. You see, in the early 1900s, adoption relied on unwed mothers or overwhelmed mothers who lacked the support and resources needed to raise their children. It was a way for them to give their children a better life and free them from what they would consider a burden or stigma placed upon them by society, who often demonized them as unfit mothers. But the problem for Jane and others was that the supply did not match the demand. Her first adoption, a woman reached out to her and arranged for her to adopt her granddaughter, which Russell was successfully able to do. When she had the urge to adopt again, she tried her luck in Europe since there was a long waiting list in the US. She visited orphanages all across Europe and found herself dissatisfied and unable to adopt any of the children. Finally, an Irish couple agreed to give up their son to her because they could not afford to provide an education for him. This adoption caused a scandal because legally, Jane could not adopt him because she was not a citizen of the UK, and by transporting him out of the country, she committed a crime. Unsurprisingly, she fought back in court and won. The UK changed its adoption laws, banning inter-country adoptions, and it inspired Jane to have the laws changed in the US as well. Up until this point, it was difficult for US citizens to adopt children outside of the US, but Jane made it her mission to give people like her access to kids in other countries to make up for the lack of supply in the US. Using her celebrity, she was able to successfully lobby federal and state governments, making international adoptions much, much easier. Opening Pandora's box. Jane founded the World Adoption International Fund.
WAIF is an international adoption plan. It's trying to get the homeless children of the world and the parents who want children so badly together, wherever they may be.
During the 1950s, she worked closely with international social services to place orphans from war zones into the arms of Western families. As their face and fundraising partner, she raised money, publicized their cause, hosted charity events for her Hollywood friends, and connected prospective adoptive parents to adoption agencies. She was deified as a humanitarian crusader and the mother of orphans. But me, personally, I've referred to her as the mother of international child trafficking. Just within the past year, the atrocities she helped advocate for, facilitate, and fund have come to light. South Korea, one of the many places WAIF operated, concluded its investigation into its adoption cases between 1964 and 1999. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission discovered human rights abuses and child trafficking, which they explicitly avoid saying, even if it was the case. Children were declared orphans despite having living parents. Children were removed from families without proper consent. Again, they don't explicitly say it, but some kids were kidnapped. Some children were switched or misrepresented when an infant died. Hospitals and orphanages manipulated or bribed families to give up their children, and documents were falsified to meet adoption demand. The president of South Korea apologized, but what the trafficked children and parents want more than anything is accountability and justice, which I hope they get. It didn't just happen in South Korea, but almost all the countries her organization operated in. Adoption may not have started or ended with Jane, but no celebrity has left a lasting impact on the industry like she did. What came from good intention led to the reckless disregard and crimes committed against the most vulnerable people on earth. If Russell's legacy makes anything clear, is that nothing good comes from just intentions alone. And most importantly, exploiters are always going to exploit. As we move on, you will learn. Celebrities who adopt are exploiters who do not have good intentions, or they adopt them from exploiters who do not have them either. Joan Crawford, like Jane Russell, could not have kids as a result of unaliving her unborn children. So she, just like Russell, turned to adoption to have children. In Joan's case, she was an unmarried woman, and unmarried women were barred from adopting kids in California. But did that stop her? No. Joan hired Alice Hugh, a baby broker, to supply her with children. Christina was born illegitimately, and shortly after her birth was handed over to Joan's baby broker, who would hand her over to Joan. According to Christina,
"In no time at all, I was a chubby, smiling baby named Joan. My towels were monogrammed, Joan. The silver picture frame with my birth statistics is monogrammed, Joan, and the small Bible given to me as a baby says, 'To little Joan, only a few weeks old, and I was to be Joan Crawford, Jr.'"
The narcissism, right? Crawford had custody of Joan for about 11 months before legally adopting her in Nevada and changing her name to Christina. A few years later, Joan married Philip Terry, but still relied on Alice to provide her with a boy she named Christopher. who would be returned to his mother after she located him and harassed her for money, according to Joan. Not long after, she would replace him with another illegitimate boy named Philip Terry Jr., who would later have his name changed to Christopher after divorcing Terry and taking full custody of her adopted children. After her divorce, she adopts Kathy and Cindy. Joan would like us all to believe they are fraternal twins, but I have doubts. If you take into consideration she adopted them from Tennessee Children's Home Society, run by known child trafficker George Tan.
Joan always said that they were twins, dressed them alike, made them call themselves twins. Actually, they had been born a month apart to different families.
When you look into Tan's history of coercion, kidnapping, and falsifying documents, it's entirely plausible. When Kathy and Cindy sued Christina for implying as such, they won the case not on DNA evidence, but on documents that could have been falsified by Tan's Tennessee Children's Home Society. And if that's not enough for you to entertain the possibility they're not related, well, just look at them. Now that you know how she acquired her children, you should probably know why, because as we move forward, you will notice a pattern among celebrities. Joan Crawford was 35 and she wasn't getting any younger. New stars were on the rise and fighting to take her spot. Dubbed box office poison, she was no longer selling tickets that justified her salary. Adopting children was her way of keeping the spotlight on her. Their entire lives were curated for publicity, where Joan would frequently invite photographers to her home and partner up with publicity teams to generate interest and attention.
The curious thing was that she tried to give me the impression that her life was saturated with maternal devotion. She showed me scrapbooks filled with photographs of Joan bathing the children, Joan combing their hair, Joan making milkshakes for them in the kitchen, Joan getting them dressed. The pictures had all been taken by professional photographers, and I began to believe that she had adopted the children for publicity purposes.
However, the images she crafted for the public was far from reality. Joan was a workaholic and prioritized her career above her children. The children were raised by nannies and had their needs met by servants. If you've ever heard or seen Mommy Dearest, it references Christina's memoir exposing Crawford's abuse, alcoholism, and exploitation.
No wire hangers! What's wire hangers doing in this closet when I told you no wire hangers ever?
Christopher was strapped to bed every night in a sleep safe until he was 12 and would constantly run away from home to escape her. He suffered from it, and it affected him his entire life.
She was not a mother, and she was not a family. I honestly, to this day, do not believe that she ever cared for me.
When they were no longer cute and little enough to exploit, she shipped them off to boarding school and made arrangements to keep them out of the way. Kathy and Cindy deny any abuse and maintain Joan was a saint. But many people have corroborated Christina's account, and I believe her. Christina is very fair to Joan and gives her a lot of grace. But more than anything, Mommy Dearest is a story of an adopted child coming to terms with the reality of her adoption.
Why in God's name did she adopt all of us in the first place? Sure, we served a purpose when we were adorable babies. She got years of prime publicity out of us. She built a public image on us as her career began to decline. Millions of unsuspecting fans thought, what a wonderful woman to take 4 little orphans into her home. Hundreds of pages of movie magazine garbage were turned out on what a wonderful mother she was. We were paraded out one by one in our darling little starched outfits and pseudo-British manners. We were photographed from every angle and cooed over by pandering publicity hacks. We were sent presents from fans all over the world, presents we were not allowed to keep. We were the best-mannered, best-behaved, most perfect child mannequins the Queen Bee could produce. After we had served our purpose and gotten all the publicity that could humanly be turned loose on the adoring public, we made a fatal error. We started growing up. We started becoming people. It was no longer possible to control our every thought, our every gesture, our every move. We were no longer the perfectly manipulated, camera-ready puppets that spouted, "I love you, Mommy dearest," at the slightest indication of her whimsical displeasure. Mommy dearest got her feelings hurt. Mommy dearest became distressed. Mommy dearest became enraged when she perceived that all was not well in mannequin land. The children, the babies, were in a state of mutiny. Mommy dearest has to make an example of eldest daughter. Mommy dearest has to punish bad babies. Mommy dearest beat bad babies. Mommy dearest try to kill bad babies. Mommy dearest doesn't want to have anything more to do with bad babies. Mommy dearest put bad babies away from her. Mommy dearest find a prison for bad babies and lock them up to punish them for being such bad babies.
Ultimately, the twins were not there to witness the abuse. Neither were her celebrity friends who rushed to deny it. So who are we to deny her and Christopher's experience with Joan? Baker shares a lot of similarities with Joan. They both came from poverty and learned that putting out and using their bodies to seduce men was highly effective in helping them get what they want in life: money, fame, power, and a successful career. The problem is, as they got older, they became less and less desirable, so it became difficult for them to maintain their lifestyles. Like Joan, when her career was declining, she turned to adoption and used innocent children to hold on to the spotlight. Baker, who successfully built a career in France, decided she wanted to go to war with the US over its persistent racism against blacks from her comfy castle in France. It's ironic, considering she built her fame and fortune exploiting racist tropes for her white audiences in Europe. But I digress. Baker turned to activism and hatched up a plan where she would adopt children of different races, ethnicities, and religions from all over the world.
It would be my own experiment in brotherhood, and I would use a unique formula. I decided to adopt as many children as I could and to segregate them from the environments that they were in. And not only would I teach them, but I would bring in people to teach them all sorts of things I did not know. As they grew up with each other in close harmony, not knowing anything about what life was really like in the outside world, as they grew up, they could go out as emissaries of peace and brotherhood themselves, and pretty soon their children, and even their children, could spread the word of brotherhood. I figured that if somebody didn't start all this, no one ever would, and I decided then it would be me. I would get children from every race, every creed, every religion. They would be every color of the rainbow. Then it hit me all at once. They would be the rainbow children of Josephine Baker.
Baker adopted 12 children and collected them like infinity stones. Some obtained through shady means, others potentially trafficked. Aiko and Jano are byproducts of American occupation of Japan. Luis was purchased from his parents in Colombia, and Mara was purchased from his parents in Venezuela, where she narrowly escapes kidnapping charges with the help of France's ambassador to the country. Jari was adopted from Finland. According to her secretary, she just appeared at the hotel with him. She does not know how or where she got him. According to Josephine, Kofi was presented to her when she was visiting Senegal. He would have been sacrificed by his parents if she hadn't taken him. But there is a very likely chance she is exaggerating, because that's what she does. Brahim and Marianne were scooped up from Algeria when they were left abandoned during the country's war for independence from France. Jean-Claude and Moise were acquired from a foster home near Paris. Stelina was handed to her by her Moroccan mother, and Noelle was found abandoned in a dumpster in Paris. Aiko was raised to be ethnically Japanese, practicing Shintoism. Although Jano was ethnically Japanese and white, he was presented as Korean and raised Buddhist. Luis was identified as Black and raised Catholic, even though he was Colombian. Jari represented his Nordic ancestry and was raised Protestant. Denied adopting a child from Israel, Moise was raised to be Jewish and was forced to eat kosher and wear a tiny hat. Brahim represented Arabs and was raised Muslim. Kofi represented Africa and practiced animism. Mara was an indigenous Indian. Stelina represented Morocco. Jean-Claude, Marianne, and Noel represented France and were raised Catholic. And all of this was subject to change. The children were display pieces to show the world her vision of a post-racial utopia. As her collection grew, she turned her adopted children into a living cultural exhibit where the children performed and entertained tourists who paid to see them.
The question of whether or not she exploited the children is still being argued among those who knew her. When the youngsters were indoors, they could be observed through a picture window. They were washed, reprimanded, fed in full view of anyone willing to pay an extra 5 francs for the spectacle, and the cameras never stopped.
Not only were they treated as zoo animals, but their upbringing was extremely unstable and not suitable for children. Josephine was in a loveless lavender marriage with Joe Bouillon, who had no interest in her project. Their relationship was already volatile, and it didn't change when children were brought back to her castle. Whenever Baker adopted a child, she did it without his knowledge or consent, and he grew to resent her for it. But what could he do? She was the moneymaker in the family. The castle was not fit to raise any children, and it was full of dangers, including rabid monkeys escaping from their cages and roaming free around her property. According to her adopted son Jean-Claude,
sometimes there were as many as 30 monkeys at Les Milandes, and they were often trouble. Some were rabid and died in their cages, some escaped. Once, Yvette says, a monkey stole a 6-week-old baby, the daughter of an employee. He had rabies, and the little one died, and the monkey had to be killed, and can you believe? The police were not even called?
Also, according to Jean-Claude,
people in the village were worried for their children, George told me, and they were worried for these children of Josephine when she was away, because Josephine's life had become their life. Josephine's worries became their worries. Joe would seduce young men, and a few families blackmailed Josephine. Most of these boys were working at the chateau, and suddenly their pay would be a bit higher. For young kids, that place was an palace.
Baker was never home and hired servants, nannies, and tutors to look after them, while she was away constantly performing for others. Her behavior was so unstable. The woman was crazy. It was a constant revolving door. They would get attached to a caretaker. Then Josephine would come home, become jealous, and fire them. Ironically, Joe was the only constant in their life, and when she chased them out of the castle, the only constant they had was gone, and it saddened them. The children suffered from narcissistic abuse, where Josephine and her social experiment, which was her real child, came before the children. Jean-Claude recounts her saying,
I have kept a file on each child. You will not believe it, but as they grow up, they develop the characteristics and faults of their race. Look at Aiko. Like the Japanese, he'll smile at you and knife you in the back. And Luis, have you noticed what a beautiful black boy he is? He will drive the girls crazy. And in the end, he will fall in love with one who drags him around by the nose.
Disgusted by it, he thought,
she was like a mad scientist documenting lab specimens, a little frightening and certainly racist.
I would most certainly agree. As they grew older, the Rainbow Tribe naturally rebelled, seeking their own identities outside of Josephine, which upset her. For example, Moise rejected his Jewish identity, reclaimed his French heritage, and converted to Catholicism. He was kicked out of her house, and she did not attend his wedding no matter how hard he pleaded. And towards the end of her life, some of them deeply resented her.
She's mad. You see how she traumatized Stelina? She can't do that number with me. I never asked to be adopted. I would have been happier in an orphanage with an ID bracelet. At least I would have known who I am. And I wouldn't have been an object of curiosity, like we all are with her. She chose pretty babies. None of us are ugly or mutilated. At home, she plays the poor old black mother. And when we open the newspapers, here she is half naked at close to 70, laughing, drinking champagne with actors, presidents, and always dropping a word about her children, her ideals, human dignity. If she had dignity, she would not treat us as she does. She has used us for her career. If she wants us to live like a normal family, then she must act normal too.
But she never did act normally, and her legacy would continue without any scrutiny, where she would later be inducted into France's pantheon, where her life and experimentation with children would be sanitized. Mia Farrow and her adoption addiction, who helped legalize adopting multiple foreign-born children in the US. According to people close to her, adopting was an unsustainable high for her. For a brief moment, it would make her feel good, but when reality set in, it would wear off and she would crash. To get back up again, she would get the urge to adopt another helpless child to feel good about herself. It was a cycle where she would prop up a child until she came down, only to cast them aside and do it again and again. Even though she officially adopted 10 children, there were others she disposed of if the child required too much care or her biological kids did not like them. There was Sanjay, who was severely retarded, and she gave him up to a family in New Mexico. There's also Tunisia, a crack-addicted baby who was returned because she required too much care and attention. An unidentified Mexican baby was sent back after a few days for unknown reasons. And a child suffering from spina bifida was sent back because her biological son, Fletcher, did not like him. How she's acquiring these kids, I don't know. How she's able to get rid of them so quickly, I don't know. But clearly it's happening frequently enough that her kids began to notice. And when the kids start to notice, you know it's a problem. And just like Joan and Josephine before her, it was a vanity project, except she would adopt disabled kids because healthy kids wouldn't have given her the attention she needed. Moses has cerebral palsy, a lifelong condition that makes it hard for a person to move and control their muscles. Tam was blind. Frankie Min is blind. Thaddeus was paraplegic, as she would force him to wear heavy iron leg braces for public appearances rather than his lighter plastic ones, because the lighter ones were worn under the trousers and would not be seen. Isaiah and Quincy were crack babies. Her addiction and favored treatment of her biological kids made her adopted children feel disposable and neglected. According to Suni and Moses, they were treated as second-class citizens.
We did the grocery shopping starting in 3rd grade for the entire family. Lark and I wrote the list of everything that we needed for the house. We paid for it, we unpacked it. When I went to ethical culture, I had to pick up my siblings. In Connecticut, Lark cooked and we cleaned the bathrooms, cleared the dishes, washed up, and did the sweeping. When Woody started coming up to Connecticut, I ironed Mia's sheets.
They also claim Farrow was mentally, physically, and emotionally abusive towards them.
I'm sure my mother had good intentions in adopting children with disabilities from the direst of circumstances, but the reality inside our walls was very different. It pains me to recall instances in which I witnessed siblings, some blind or physically disabled, dragged down a flight of stairs to be thrown into a bedroom or a closet, then having the door locked from the outside. She even shut my brother Thaddeus, paraplegic from polio, in an outdoor shed overnight as punishment for a minor transgression.
Here is one example of his own abuse.
Once, when I was given a new pair of jeans, I thought they would look cool if I cut off a couple of the belt loops. When Mia saw what I had done, she spanked me repeatedly and had me remove all my clothing, saying, "You're not deserving of any clothes," and making me stand naked in the corner of her room in front of my older siblings, who had just returned from dinner with their father, Andre.
He continues and says, Soon Yi had it the worst.
Soon Yi was her most frequent scapegoat. My sister had an independent streak and, of all of us, was the least intimidated by Mia. When pushed, she would call our mother out on her behavior, and ugly arguments would ensue. When Sun Yi was young, Mia once threw a large porcelain centerpiece at her head. Luckily, it missed, but the shattered pieces hit her legs. Years later, Mia beat her with a telephone receiver. Sun Yi made it clear that her desire was simply to be left alone, which increasingly became the case. Even if her relationship with Woody was unconventional, it allowed her to escape. Others weren't so lucky.
Sun Yi's relationship with Woody was weird and messed up, but contrary to what Mia wants people to believe, she was not underage when the relationship began, even though Farrow really wanted it to be for legal reasons. It only began after Farrow insisted Sun Yi attend Knicks games with him. Their relationship was a byproduct of her abuse towards Sun Yi and her exploitation of Woody. They bonded over it. In Farrow's eyes, Sun Yi was hopelessly stupid and defiant. But what did she expect from a 7-year-old who got handed over to a foreign white woman who doesn't speak her language or understand her culture?
She tried to teach me the alphabet with those wooden blocks. If I didn't get them right, sometimes she'd throw them at me or down on the floor. Who can learn under that pressure?
Farrow destroyed her confidence by telling her and everyone she knew Sun Yi is not smart, which is why it's not surprising to me that she ran into Woody's arms. I just don't think he should have opened them for her. The problem with Farrow is that she thought she was helping these kids, not realizing how she was suffocating and traumatizing them. A lot like Lenny from Of Mice and Men, who loved soft animals and would accidentally kill them whenever he tried to pet or take care of them.
What you got in your hand?
George, that's my mouse. But I didn't kill it, George. Honest, I found it, Dad.
Give it here.
George, leave me have it.
Give it here.
Speaking of which, why would schools think it was appropriate for us to read such a messed up book? Farrow had every right to feel betrayed. But after dragging Dylan into this woman should be in jail. The press will have you believe the allegations were true, but the reality is investigations already concluded they were false and she was coached by Farrow.
After I spoke to People magazine in 2014 about how I was treated, Dylan called it a betrayal and said that I was dead to her. She later publicly dismissed my recollections of my childhood as irrelevant. This from a woman who now styles herself an advocate for abuse victims.
If you ask me, it's more of a cult than a family. Look, to be fair, she refutes all of this. But it doesn't track. Sun Yi and Woody Allen are married because of the shared abuse they experienced with her. Thaddeus sadly offed himself. Tam died under mysterious circumstances, but Moses claims she too offed herself, but Farrow chose not to disclose it. Lark became addicted to drugs, contracted AIDS, and died without Farrow by her side on Christmas. Dylan has to live the rest of her life dealing with the trauma Farrow planted inside of her head, the trauma of forcing her to live with it as her truth, and the trauma of making her repeatedly tell the world about it. Moses became an adoption trauma therapist as a result of his upbringing with Mia Farrow. All of this sounds bad, I know, but I didn't even mention that some of the children could have possibly been obtained through shady means. Despite all of this, she is still an honorary UNICEF ambassador alum, and the media still pushes her allegations and props her up to be a saint when an investigation biased against Woody proved him to be innocent and proved her to be the true villain in the story. If you did not know, Angelina Jolie, despite her privilege, was an unstable woman with a history of self-harm, self-sabotage, and substance abuse, which she did not hide and used to get attention. It's very clear to anybody paying attention that Angelina was not fit to adopt a child, so much so that her father did what he could to sabotage her adoption, but his efforts were unsuccessful. But it makes you wonder, who would allow such an unstable person to adopt a child? Angelina adopted Maddox from Cambodia through Lauren Galindo, who ran Seattle International Adoptions, and the only agency I suspect willing to give her a child. Why, you may ask? Not long after, Galindo was exposed for child trafficking and convicted for fraud and money laundering. Because apparently selling babies isn't a chargeable offense in the US. And just like Mia Farrow before her, she became addicted to adopting children and witnessing human suffering. Because sadly, people like her find the will to live by having constant reminders of their privilege and finding purpose in their morality. Sahara was adopted from Ethiopia, known to have a shady track record when it comes to adoptions, which her adoption just so happened to be according to her mother. A woman came forward claiming she was Sahara's mother, debunking Angelina's story that her mother died of AIDS.
I could not look after her, and my mother, uncle, and his wife suggested I put her up for adoption. I was so weak I agreed. I agreed that she should be put up for adoption, but if I had my chance again, I would have kept her.
But she still expresses gratitude.
She will have a better life with Angelina. The thing that makes me upset is saying, I'm dead. I'm alive and have never had AIDS.
She has nothing against Angelina and wants nothing more other than to reunite with her daughter and to establish a relationship. But when the opportunity came, a member of Brad and Angelina's team sabotaged her chance by lying to them. Sadly, it seems she'll never be able to reunite with her child. As soon as Pax's adoption became known, many conflicting and disparaging stories surrounding his birth mother and her family were spread in the press. They claimed that Pax was born out of wedlock to a deadbeat heroin addict incapable of taking care of her son. This was perceived as fact until 2016 when she and her family spoke to a local news outlet in Vietnam. According to them, none of it was true.
For a long time, Pham Tu Dung has been working and living normally. There is absolutely no story that she is in prison. Along with that, she has not given any interviews to anyone about Pax Tien. Her father, Mr. Pham Chien, says, "We are very surprised that there is such fabricated information. It damages our feelings for our grandchild, as well as Mr. and Mrs. Pitt Jolie."
Just like Sahara's mother, she and her family are grateful for Angelina and wish nothing but the best for her son and their grandson.
My life has had its ups and downs, and Pax Tien was born to me, but I could not give him a beautiful life. I am very grateful to Mr. Pitt and Mrs. Jolie for raising Pax Tien and giving him a future that I could not, Tu Dung said.
Who made up the rumors, it's unclear. But what it did do was make his birth mother and her family look bad and made Angelina and Brad look like saints. From what very little they do share, it seems as if it's another tale of poverty and desperation, exaggerated to promote the white savior complex, to further distract people from their scandalous affair. Don't let her humanitarian image fool you. Angelina went from exploiting her own trauma to exploiting the trauma of others to feed her need for attention and fill the empty void created by her privilege. Instead of using her influence to shed light on the realities of the adoption industry, she drove up adoption demand, perpetuating the abuse and trafficking of children. When Madonna, Hollywood's biggest attention, WHORE, saw how much attention Angelina Jolie was getting from her humanitarian work in adoptions, she saw it as an opportunity to thrust herself back into the spotlight again at the expense of Malawi and its people. Madonna said, "Malawi chose me." And in defense of Malawi and its people, no, they did not. And if they could banish her, they probably would, if it wasn't for their corrupt government. Madonna found out about Malawi through Victoria Neeland, who was desperately looking for aid to support the orphans in her country. Neeland reached out to Spirituality for Kids, run by the Kabbalah Center, a program used to indoctrinate kids into their cult. Why she would reach out to a cult, I don't know. This is where things get murky. So Madonna will have you believe that she was immediately in contact with Victoria. And from there, it all came together where she fell in love with the country and just so happened to want to adopt and rescue a child and raise Malawi on her own. But the actions that took place tell a different story. And it starts with the director of the Kabbalah Center, Michael Berg. Michael Berg is the son of Philip Berg, who started the Kabbalah Center with his wife, Karen Berg. And yes, she's a Karen. He inherited their cult of exploitation, as well as their really bad habit of exploiting their followers and moving money around to fund their lavish lifestyle, and God only knows what else. You see, Malawi was an opportunity for him. It was a way for him to extract more money from their followers to launder through Spirituality for Kids Foundation, with links to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Just sit with that for a bit. Madonna happens to be one of those not so smart followers and signed off on the Malawi mission as the chairman of Spirituality for Kids, but on the condition she could have her own African child who could help her compete with Angelina Jolie and become reborn as a saint. Which did not happen, so you can still have faith in humanity. With their agendas in order, Raising Malawi was born to steal donations, con more money from Madonna, and acquire her an African child. The books and operations were to be managed entirely by the Kabbalah Center, while Madonna would be the face of the charity. With this partnership, the Kabbalah Center was able to secure her an adoption informally without having to adhere to the country's strict adoption laws before she even visited the country. According to Mavutu Banda, a journalist who reports on Madonna's shenanigans in Malawi,
Guy was the first one to come to Malawi, and Guy was the first to even see David at the orphanage. There were 12 kids lined up that Madonna was supposed to choose from. Then apparently, as Guy was walking, visiting one of the orphanages, he bumped into this child who happened to be David. And from there, he was excited about it. They did a video and took some pictures, and they sent those pictures to Madonna, and Madonna went crazy about David. That's how it happened. David was not on the list of 12 children that government apparently had arranged for them.
At first, she wants Mercy, but when she finds out she can't have Mercy, she picks David, who is not an orphan.
David wasn't Madonna's first choice. The one she really wanted was a little girl.
She also saw another child when she was here on that first trip.
That was Macy.
The child she wants to adopt now.
Yes.
Like David, Mercy had a family too. Mavuto went to see them. But unlike David's father, Mercy's family stood in Madonna's way.
Disregarding his father's existence as the narcissistic feminist she proudly is, she flew out to Malawi on a humanitarian trip in April with Guy Ritchie, Michael Berg, and a camera team commissioned by the Kabbalah Center to meet him. Her publicist denied she was there to adopt a child, but a government spokesperson verified Banda's reports and told Reuters she absolutely did plan to adopt a child when she returned in October, just in case David didn't work out. She formally announced Raising Malawi after returning in October to fulfill a multi-million-dollar pledge to help orphans in Malawi. And in return, the government of Malawi upheld their end of the bargain by fast-tracking her adoption. Because there was no way in hell Madonna was going to live in Malawi or allow background checks to legally and ethically adopt him. She arrives on the 4th, files to adopt David on the 10th, gets approved to take David back to London with her on the 12th, leaves without him because he doesn't have his passport ready on the 13th, and has her assistant and bodyguard go fetch him on the 16th before an injunction is requested to stop the adoption. She didn't even have the courtesy to stay behind or pick him up, which says a lot. In order to adopt a child from Malawi, the adopter must follow the laws of the country because the laws exist to protect children from the trafficking industry. But no, Madonna is above the law, and she didn't hesitate to use her charity to bribe the country into allowing her adoptions, with the help of the Kabbalah Center. Even though the government waived its laws for her, she was sued by multiple NGOs for violating Malawi's adoption laws and was only granted an interim adoption until her adoption case was ultimately settled. She never resided in Malawi. No visits were made to Madonna's homes, and she did not undergo any assessment to see if she was fit enough to take care of the child. Banda implied he was coerced by the government to give up David, according to his affidavit. He cannot read or write in English, so he relied on what the government officials, who were in Madonna's back pockets, told him. The papers he signed, according to them, said Madonna would look after David the way the orphanage did, and she planned to educate him. After completing his education, David would be returned to him. He thought it was an open adoption, where he would actively be a part of his son's life. He did not know she would run off with him permanently with little to no contact. According to them, Madonna bribed the government through her charitable donations. And when you follow the money, it's not hard to believe. No matter how clear the NGOs made it that Malawi had adoption laws that were waived just for her, the not racist Madonna had the audacity to go on a press tour.
But there are no legal adoption laws in Malawi, there are only tribal customs. It's a very kind of ambiguous process. They require you to identify children on the one hand, but on the other hand, they won't tell you anything about them. So you could get your hopes up, and then you could go there, and then you could be told, well, David has a granny that wants to look after him, or Mercy has an auntie that wants to look after her, even though they live in the orphanages. It's very hard because children live in these orphanages all their lives, and yet they don't actually consider them orphans.
In the case of David, the extended family there was a grandmother. There is a grandmother,
No.
sorry. According to The Guardian, there's a grandmother and David's father.
No.
This is just what the paper says. And he did visit quite often.
Yes, but that's according to the newspapers. I disagree.
The only part that was made up was her adoption story. When his father makes a fuss about him, he mysteriously changes his mind and gives Madonna his blessing to adopt David. Even though she was fully granted David's adoption, she still wanted Mercy and did everything in her power to adopt her, which involved bullying, coercing, and forcing Mercy's family to legally sign their rights away. When she filed to adopt her, she was rejected by a judge that did not like her and chose not to bend the laws for her. But Madonna can't take no for an answer, so she has the Kabbalah Center do her dirty work, per usual, and has her lawyer take it up to the Supreme Court, where they granted her the adoption.
Yes, full adoption. It's been granted.
And just like David, she didn't even bother to pick her up. Later, she had the adoption laws amended just for her. So essentially, next time she decides she wants to take another African child home with her, she can because of her charity. It should not surprise you that not only did she pledge to build a $15 million school, but she also hired Malawi's vice president's sister to be the CEO and headmistress of the school while fighting to adopt Mercy. But the school was never built, and the IRS discovered the Kabbalah Center was commingling and misappropriating funds from raising Malawi. About $3.8 million designated for the school was mismanaged and went missing under the care of Michael Berg. This is where their paths diverge. Only on paper, Raising Malawi severed ties with the Kabbalah Center in 2011 and hired the biggest expert in the philanthropy world to help clean up her image. Unsuccessfully, Nielsen publicly blamed Malawi and threw Oponio under the bus for the school's failure, and not the Bergs. Because despite defrauding and ruining her reputation, she and the Bergs were still like this. And doing what cults do best, they tricked her into believing it was the clueless and incompetent Africans who did her in. Mind you, only $8,659 reached Malawi to build the school. Oponio's sister would become the president of Malawi, and when Madonna and the Bergs came for her sister, let's just say Madonna would have her VIP status revoked.
Granted, Madonna has adopted 2 children from Malawi. According to the record, this gesture was humanitarian and of her accord. It, therefore, comes across as strange and depressing that for a humanitarian act, prompted only by her, Madonna wants Malawi to be forever chained to the obligation of gratitude. Kindness, as far as its ordinary meaning is concerned, is free and anonymous. If it can't be free and silent, it is not kindness. It is something else. Blackmail is the closest it becomes. Among the many things that Madonna needs to learn as a matter of urgency is the decency of telling the truth. For her to tell the whole world that she is building schools in Malawi when she has actually only contributed to the construction of classrooms is not compatible with manners of someone who thinks she deserves to be revered with state grandeur. The difference between a school and a classroom should be the most obvious thing for a person demanding state courtesy to decipher. For her to accuse Mrs. Oponyo for indiscretions that have clearly arisen from her personal frustrations that her ego has not been massaged by the state is uncouth and speaks volumes of a musician who desperately thinks she must generate recognition by bullying state officials instead of playing decent music on the stage.
Madonna was placed in timeout where she did not adopt until 2017, after she fulfills her pledge to build a hospital. Well, not a hospital, just an extension of a hospital, but she likes to make people believe it was a hospital. Just like the other families, the twins had a living father. Not that Madonna cared, but what can I say? It's her daddy issues wreaking havoc on poor African fathers again. He, just like the others, placed his daughters temporarily in the orphanage so they could receive better care after their mother died, which is how Madonna was able to swoop in and take them for her own vanity. When signing away their rights, he was told they would be in Madonna's care up until they finished their education and would remain in the children's lives. But that's not what happened. He, like the other families, lost his children. None of the families were ever really able to connect and build a relationship with their kids or meet them whenever they visited the country. I want to stress that none of these children were abandoned by their families. David's father visited him at the orphanage, bringing him food and gifts. Mercy's grandmother visited her at the orphanage, bringing her food and gifts. Esther and Stella's father visited them at the orphanage, bringing them food and gifts.
I used to cycle there down a dirt road, taking 2 hours each way. I brought little dresses and gifts for them, and they would sit on my lap, one twin on either side, and laugh and play with me. They called me Ababa, and when they came home for holidays to the village, they loved to be with their brother and sisters.
They all loved their children, and they were all led to believe it was an open adoption. That is what they agreed and signed off on. The saddest story is Mercy's grandmother, Lucy, who literally brought her into this world and lost her daughter soon after childbirth. She fought to keep Mercy and pushed back against the men in her family who believed Mercy would have a better future with Madonna. Lucy only agreed to let her go on the condition she would still be able to see Mercy and build a relationship with her, and she never did. As a result of her adoptions, she has multiple allegations of child trafficking, most notably the EWF, which called for an investigation which we shall explore. The law states she must be a resident of Malawi for a minimum of 18 months. As I said earlier, she never established a residence in Malawi. Every family was lied to and on, manipulated, coerced, and bullied into signing away their custody permanently. All of them had living fathers, an extended family that loved them. Whenever a pledge or donation was made, Madonna filed for adoption. First, it was investing about $3 million into orphans and building orphanages across Malawi. Money was mismanaged, no orphanages were fully built and completed, and only $500,000 was accounted for and donated to assist existing orphanages with their needs. Second, it was building a $15 million school. The project started off by poaching farmland from a tribe in Malawi without payment, knowledge, or consent to build a state-of-the-art all-girls academy that would rival Oprah's school in South Africa. The $15 million school was never built or ever projected to even cost $15 million. It was a $10 million school, which was reduced to $6 million because Madonna says she had no money. Funds were mismanaged and misappropriated by the Kabbalah Center. The Malawian people were blamed for its failure. Third, the Mercy James Center for Pediatric Surgery, which she pledged and claimed she built, was just an extension for pediatric surgery added to an existing hospital. Which makes one wonder, where did the money allocated for a center go? Madonna went to extreme lengths to make sure her unfiltered fantasies and unedited imagery were made available publicly, and she went to extreme lengths pushing for speedy adoptions so they would never find out about it. In other words, she uses her adopted children to get attention. Whether it's posting inappropriate suggestive photos of them, grooming them for the entertainment industry instead of pushing them to learn things that would make them independent, taking only them on tour with her to perform like circus acts, or allowing the 11-year-old Esther to vogue on stage night after night as if she were reenacting Cuties. You may find it offensive, but it's true. Ask yourself if this is the environment you want your children, not adults, children growing up in. Whether you consider it to be good or bad is up to you. But in the eyes of my African people who are very, very, very conservative, they consider it grooming.
Why are you gay?
All facts considered, she obtained these children through illegal and unethical means. So by definition, they were trafficked, in my opinion. Just like everything in Hollywood, celebrity adoptions are for show and publicity. To them, children are commodities that can be bought and used as accessories to maintain their celebrity. When they are not putting on a show for us, they hand the kids off to caretakers to look after them and go back to living their narcissistic lives without suffering from any accountability for their role in trafficking children. At some point, there was a need for it, but they replaced that need with vanity, and that vanity created an insatiable demand that could never be fulfilled. It was no longer about child welfare, but about optics and looking like a good person, which doesn't require you to actually be a good person. I know some people will push back and still justify adoption, but there is no justification for it. Western materialism doesn't automatically equate with a better life. If it did, you wouldn't have so many messed up rich kids. Adoption is not glamorous, good, or normal, and we need to stop pretending it is. It is a byproduct of chaos. If everything was in order, it wouldn't exist. So instead of continuing to believe adoption is a necessary good, I implore you to think again. Wars destabilize families and subject women to occupied soldiers who give birth to their unwanted children. As long as Western powers keep meddling in other countries, they will never escape poverty, and parents will continue to place their children in orphanages to supplement care they simply can't afford. Illegitimate or not, that child does not belong to anybody else but the people who made it, and they should never be made to feel ashamed about it or talked out of raising it. No amount of money in the world will replace parenting, and you do not need to be wealthy to be a good parent, because good parenting only requires love and sacrifice. No parent should have to give up their child because they can't afford it. There are always exceptions to the rule, but you can't continue to allow a system that allows exploiters to exploit, especially a system designed to exploit children. Children are sacred and they need to be protected. So if you walk away from this with anything, especially adoption, is that just because something looks and sounds good doesn't mean it is good. It's oftentimes what looks and sound good that turn out to be the most sinister because you would never expect it. The more you know.